there's a few things the remake did better. One thing I never understood is how people seem to be okay with the cover of a song or the HD redux of a video game, and yet the remake of a movie always dealt with the pressure of having to be an improvement over, or at least different from the original, lest they get ridiculed for their very existence. I can understand such a criticism for a horror movie since they rely on the element of surprise, but I never go into these live-action remakes of Disney movies expecting them to be an improvement or variation. I mean, how many times have we rewatched these classics and I'm assuming never got sick of them? 100? What's wrong with 101? Even so, there are a few elements of this remake that I felt improved over those same elements from the original, which is to say, the remake will always have the original to thank for its existence, as I don't feel like a full-fledged photorealistic nature movie like this, or at least one with a huge Hollywood budget behind it, would exist unless it was a remake of the highest-grossing 2D animated movie of all time in a slew of successful remakes. The reason I bring that up is because as far as which one is the better film overall, I don't know. I like both for different reasons, and the things I like in the remake are going to be the main topic for today, as I give you my top 10 things that I feel like the remake did better than the original. But before I get into that, I must address the two huge elements that the remake did indeed drop the ball on. As of late, Disney has been pushing to present their lead female characters as strong and independent, confusing that with perfect and boring. As much as this remake gets right, its version of Nala sadly falls into this category as well. You never get the feeling that she's best friends with Simba because she's always discouraging him from doing the wrong thing. The original's version was in on the fun, making the friendship even more believable. Even when he's brought back from the dead, she has to be responsible. The original's version at least takes time to let that sink in before diving into the discussion of right and wrong, but the remake's version is too polished for that, so we have to jump into "Get your rump back to Pride Rock, cub." Nala, much like the other fierce female leads, wasn't riveting because she was perfect. She was riveting because she had imperfections to overcome. And unfortunately, this remake suffered from that misunderstanding. The Stampede is arguably the most iconic and memorable scene from the original. It's tense, it's terrifying, and it left, for lack of a better word, a scar on most audiences. It's a scene that is so massive in its impact that the remake was pretty much doomed to fail at it. And so they did. Your complaints are my complaints. There are too few wildebeests. Simba and Mufasa could easily maneuver in between them. If somebody fell into it, they could easily get back up. The funny thing is, I actually know how this scene could have been repaired. Instead of a wildebeest stampede, make it flooding water, because that's essentially what the stampede was in the original, a flood of wildebeests. I mean, I know it's a dried out canyon, but come on, you could have set a body of water nearby that was being held up by a flimsy tree or something. I don't know. The point is much more important from a dramatic standpoint for Simba to be in grave danger and for Mufasa to have died a believable death than for the cause to be wildebeests. Speaking of Mufasa's death though, they dropped the ball on that aspect as well. I understand better than anyone else, I'm sure, that a photorealistic CG lion is incapable of crying, but they didn't need him to be this inactive either. I mean, he couldn't have jumped on his dad's head or tugged at his ears to try and wake him up. The reason that Simba's inactivity in the original worked is because you could see the impact on his face. Having him do anything else would have been overkill. This remake's version, as much as I argued in last week's video how much emotion he could show on his face, can't cry, and therefore needed to show emotions through actions, just like that confrontation scene I mentioned last week. And they didn't, and as a result, it fell flat. If the original's version of this scene was the pinnacle of the movie, and the remake's version killed the whole movie for you, I completely understand. I honestly might have been right there with you if it was the only scene from the original that made an impact on me, but because there were so many other scenes from the original that I felt got the proper treatment in the remake, it didn't ruin the rest of the experience. So, let's offset that bashing with some appreciation, starting with a rather simple one. The comic timing in this scene is amazing. The overall comedy of Timon and Pumbaa in the remake is pretty hysterical, but this scene in particular is just skyrocketing over the original. It's where the trio, Simba included, is looking up at the stars and wondering what they are. The initial setup is timed a little bit better in the original, but then there's the part where Simba unveils what his father told him about the great kings of the past watching over them. Both versions of Timon and Pumbaa take this as a joke, but one line in between Simba saying this and both of them laughing kinda comes off as over-explaining in the original.
Somebody once told me that the great kings of the past are up there, watching over us.
Really?
You mean a bunch of royal dead guys are watching us?
This version takes the route of pausing after Simba's explanation, allowing the audience to take in how absurd this sounds to Timon and Pumbaa before they burst out laughing, and then explains why it's so absurd.
But somebody once told me the great kings of the past are up there, and they're all watching over us.
That's a good one. That's insane. That's insane.
Many people have said that Timon and Pumbaa were notably funnier in the remake, and I'll get to my overall thoughts on the duo in a bit, but this moment in particular was the improvement we didn't even know we needed. For my number 9 pick, we fly over to Britain with a casting choice that I was surprised didn't get as well received as Timon and Pumbaa, that being John Oliver as Zazu. As I mentioned in my last video, Rowan Atkinson in the original was mostly a stick in the mud, always complaining about his job, making it seem like he doesn't want to do his job.
Step lively. The sooner we get to the waterhole, the sooner we can leave.
He seemed loyal only to a certain degree, whereas the remake's version seems completely loyal and gets more nervous about the pitfalls rather than petty. John Oliver seemed perfectly cast for this direction, and the character has some insanely funny moments, like this part where he's trying to lighten the mood after Mufasa has a fight with his brother with a family story as Mufasa walks away on it.
Well, there's one in every family, sire. I had a cousin who thought he was a woodpecker. He slammed his head into trees, and our beaks aren't built for it. He was concussed regularly. Oh, you've gone. Sire, coming back!
Mr. Bean's work will always be appreciated, but I'm more game for Oliver and company. Now it's time for a safari as we head into the deepest parts of the jungle to meet up with my number 8 pick, Timon and Pumbaa's Jungle Friends. It's another one of those things that nobody really thinks about until the remake points it out, that being the fact that in the original, part of the reason Timon and Pumbaa hang out in the jungle is to be left alone. Have you been to the jungle? There's animals everywhere! Heck, people who haven't been to the jungles know that just based off their Lisa Frank folders. Not only does the remake fill in this gap by giving them a huge gaggle of friends to hang out with, it also adds to their comedy, adds a variety of characters to their lineup, and leads to an amazing musical number that was just glanced over in the original, but gets much more focused this go around. Plus, I would make the argument that making this non-predatory connection with the animals of the jungle supplements Simba's development as the king that's respectful to the circle of life, unlike a certain someone's hunting ego that nearly kills the Pride Lands. What can I say? Timon and Pumbaa have gathered up quite the posse in this movie. All the king's horses and all the king's men better gather around for our number 7 choice, a much more well-developed and intricately involved queen, Sarabi. Now, I will admit, I did admire her heartfelt sweetness from the bath scene from the original much more than the cold delivery they gave in the same scene in the remake, but think about one thing. This scene that cuts back to the Pride Lands after Scar's takeover serves no purpose in the original. It's basically a scene that leaves just as quickly as it comes, and really only serves to show the state of the Pride Lands, which we end up seeing a few scenes later, and even hear about from Nala in another scene even earlier than that. Here, not only does this scene escalate the situation, but we actually get to know Sarabi further as a character. She's seen as a noble leader to the rest of the lions, and because of that, they continue to reject Scar. Her say on whether she serves alongside Scar ends up determining the fate of the Pride. In the original, she was the leader of the hunting party, which is essential, don't get me wrong, but it still puts Scar in the higher power. Here, her decision affects whether or not he achieves the ultimate power over the Pride Lands. Call me crazy, but That's quite the essential role, and definitely worthy of a spot on this list. My number 6 pick ain't no passing craze, although he's probably passing something. Seth Rogen as Pumbaa. Just Pumbaa. Not that I didn't find Billy Eichner as Timon increasingly amusing, but I definitely prefer Nathan Lane's smooth, chill persona from the original. Rogen, on the other hand, was born to play a warthog. Ernie Sabella was admittedly more unrecognizable in his role, but something about Rogen's energy and wit definitely won me over whenever he talked. I feel like Sabella was more interested in exaggerating his voice than he was in getting across any jokes that didn't have to do with gas. Rogen's voice is more naturally exaggerated as is, which allows him to get across a lot more dialogue and therefore a wider variety of jokes.
Extra crunchy.
They're local.
Yeah. Oh, are they?
They're from right there.
Like, he probably makes 1 or 2 gas jokes, and they're basically essentials from the original. If you're aching for some bacon, Seth Rogen is definitely the big pig for this picture. Now my list intensifies as we sink our teeth into my number 5 pick. The hyenas are much more intimidating in the remake than they were in the original. Now, I'll give credit where credit's due that the hyenas in the original had a few intimidating aspects to them, with their yellow corneas and black and gray color palettes, but they're boneheads, which, yeah, I know that's part of the idea that they're supposed to be dumbass henchmen for the main villain, but they're also supposed to be said main villain's key factor to killing Mufasa and Simba, and 1, they spend more times making jokes than hunting their food, and 2, where were all of them when the hunt was on? You're telling me that all these hyenas were in the elephant graveyard and only these 3 morons went after them? The remake not only fixes all of these by making the hyenas more frequent, smarter, save for maybe 1, and more organized by making Shenzi the hyena leader, but their design is something like out of a horror movie. I mean, listen to this laugh from Shenzi and tell me it isn't inspired by every horror movie ever made. As much as I feared these 3 as a kid, especially Ed, these guys always gave me chills as an adult. The new king arises for my number 4 choice on this list, Donald Glover as adult Simba. Very few people who love the original have been able to defend Matthew Broderick in the same role. Like, you know how I said earlier that Ernie Sabella was unrecognizable as Pumbaa? This sounds like a prank dub by Ferris Bueller.
Timon and Pumbaa. You'll learn to love him.
Donald Glover is the polar opposite. He seemed like he was made for this role. When he needs to be chill, he's chill. When he needs to be emotional, he's emotional. When he needs to be tactful as a leader,
Follow me.
I'd follow his tail into battle. You could tell Broderick is trying to hit those beats, whereas Glover just naturally hits them. And wow, I wish I could play his singing chops here without getting a copyright strike, but let me tell you, the minute I heard them, I was immediately sold on him in this role. Long live the king. Things might come off a little fuzzy for some with my number 3 pick, but in all honesty, the hair scene from the remake in and of itself deserves a mini Oscar. Now, I understand people's arguments for the original's dust scene, I guess it would be. It's shorter, simpler, and gives more time for Rafiki to express his personality. Despite that last fact bothering me a little bit, this hair scene is my favorite scene in the movie, and is a welcome expansion upon the original that takes the time to show the hair going through the cycle of nature, or the circle of life if you prefer. This is something that I wish the other remakes did, as opposed to them shortening certain scenes for the sake of their new and unnecessary additions. The visuals are gorgeous, Hans Zimmer's score is breathtaking and easily one of my favorite pieces of his, and it illustrates in a mere 2 or 3 minutes the theme of the movie, that we're all connected in the great circle of life. That's a pretty decent lead-in into my number 2 choice, the expanded upon philosophies of being a king. In the original, the monarchy was pretty straightforward. Mufasa ruled the kingdom, Simba would inherit the kingdom, Scar takes the throne instead and things go bad for unexplained reasons, and Simba taking back the throne is good for the kingdom for unexplained reasons. Everything about that is flipped in the remake. Mufasa makes it clear to Simba that he doesn't own or dominate the kingdom, but instead protects it and takes care of it, maintaining the balance of life throughout it. Scar, wanting a more dominating and self-gaining rule over the kingdom, disrupts that balance of life by taking whatever he wants, overhunting as Sarabi puts it. Simba, as I mentioned earlier, learns to value and respect all life in his journey away from the Pride Lands and makes friends with all the jungle folk that Timon and Pumbaa connect him with, even with their underlying fear of him. This leads him to become a more admirable and noble king, as he respects life to a point that life returns to the Pride Lands via dissolve, rather than his regaining of the throne just magically bringing the plants back to life. Maybe that was an underlying intention with the original, but when you replace lines like this,
"And this'll all be mine?"
Everything.
with lines like this,
All of this will belong to me?
It belongs to no one, but will be yours to protect. A great responsibility.
could you blame me for taking that more out of the remake than the original? Before I get to my number one pick, I want to reiterate that none of these things necessarily make the remake better than the original. A film like the remake wouldn't exist unless something like the original was successful in the past and there wasn't a streak of successful remakes. The sole intention of this video was to give food for thought for those who thought that the remake didn't improve enough to justify its existence as a remake. With that said, let me know down in the comments below if you agree with my picks or if you thought any and all of these aspects were done better in the original, and if you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more great content, as I have fresh takes like this here every Friday, as well as quick reviews on the best new releases, and be sure to follow my Twitter account as well, as I also have fresh takes on there that don't quite flesh themselves out to full-fledged videos. Now, I know I usually give that spiel at the end of my videos, but the reason that I'm giving it here is because that is the end of this video, as my number one pick for this list is too huge of a thing for just another short paragraph at the end of this one video, and deserved a video all on its own. So, join me next Friday as I wrap up this 3-part series by giving my 3 reasons why I prefer this film's version of Scar over the originals. I'm CM Waters, and I'll see you next week.